Today we're going to be making this very fun and simple striped elf beanie that has 2 slouchy portions rather than 1. And I am working with size 4 medium weight wool yarn, and these are all by the Cascade Yarns. And you will need 2 skeins of your white color yarn. You will have a lot left over, so I recommend using the excess for my reversible Santa beanie I will be releasing next week. And you will only need 1 skein of the green colored yarn for this. And I'm also going to be using a size G or 4 1/4 millimeter crochet hook. And you will need some stitch markers for this. I recommend using scrap yarn or safety pins if you don't have actual stitch markers. And we're going to begin with the brim. So we're going to attach our yarn to our crochet hook using a slip knot. And we're going to chain 16. And once you have your 16 chains in place, I want you to turn them over so that you can access the back bump or 3rd loop back here. So this is not part of the traditional stitch you would work in. And we're going to place 1/2 double crochet slip stitch in our first stitch here. So yarn over and insert your crochet hook in your back bump, and then yarn over and drop all the loops on your crochet hook for that 1/2 double crochet slip stitch. And keep these stitches nice and loose. From here, we're going to place 1/2 double crochet slip stitch in each of these back bumps going down our row for a total of 16 stitches. And when you get to the end of your row, you're going to chain 1 and then turn your work. And we're going to skip our little chain 1 and place 1/2 double crochet slip stitch in the back loop only of each stitch in our row. So at the end of this row, you should have a total of 16 1/2 double crochet slip stitches. And at the end of your row, you're going to chain 1 and turn your work. And from here, we are just going to repeat that last row over and over to build the body of our brim. And I usually crochet my brim to anywhere between 16 and 20 inches, depending on the size of the head of the person that I'm making this for. And once you've gotten your brim to your desired length, which for me was about 20 inches, then make sure that your crochet hook is on the opposite side from your starting tail when you fold this in half. And you also want to make sure you've placed a chain 1 at the end of your last row. And from here, we're just going to join our short edges together. So we're going to begin by inserting our crochet hook up underneath our last chain stitch from our first row, and then up underneath our last stitch from our last row. We're going to yarn over and pull through all of our loops for a slip stitch. And from here, we're just going to repeat that process going up our brim to join our short edges together. So at the end of this row, you should have a total of 16 slip stitches. And at the end of your row, your brim should look something like this. So now we're going to fold the bottom portion of our brim up, and that will help hide our seam here. And we're going to go ahead and preserve our loop with one of our stitch markers. So just remove your crochet hook and slide your stitch marker in that loop. And from here, we're going to divide our brim into 4 equal parts. And we are going to attach our next color to our crochet hook using a slip knot. And from here, we are going to be joining these 2 edges of our brim in our next row. So when we're working in the brim, make sure you're working on both sides. And we're going to start right here near where we left off with our previous color. And we're just going to slide our crochet hook in the available loops here like this. And I'm going to place a single crochet and then a chain stitch to mimic a double crochet. And from here, you can tuck your starting tail for your previous color in between the fold of your brim. Make sure that you aren't accidentally working over your working yarn for your previous color. From here, we're just going to place 20 double crochets in each of our 4 sections here. And the main thing here is, since we don't have any traditional stitches to work in, you just want to try to space your stitches as evenly as you can. And you might have to double up in some of your loops. And at the end of your row, you should have a total of 80 double crochets. And at the end of your row, your beanie should look something like this. And you can remove all of your stitch markers except the one holding your loop here. And make sure that your current loop and the working yarn for your previous color are behind your project on the inside of your beanie. From here, we're going to skip our single crochet chain stitch and place a slip stitch in the top of our first double crochet. And from here, we are going to chain 2 and then place a double crochet back in our current stitch where we just placed a slip stitch. And from here, we're going to place 1 double crochet in each stitch in our row for a total of 80 double crochets. And make sure you don't accidentally work in your tiny little slip stitch at the end of your row. And we're going to skip our slip stitch and our chain 2 and then place a slip stitch in the top of our first double crochet. And from here, we're going to trade out our crochet hook and our stitch marker so that we'll be working in our previous color. And so now you should be working in your previous color, and you should also be on the inside of your hat here. And we're going to chain 4. And then we're going to slide our crochet hook back in this same stitch where we just placed our slip stitch for our previous color. But remember, we want to make sure our working yarn doesn't get caught up in this, so we're going to pull it to the side. We're going to place a slip stitch here. Then we're going to chain 2 and we're going to dive right back into that same stitch with a double crochet. And from here, we're going to place 1 double crochet in each stitch in our row for a total of 80 double crochets. And at the end of your row, you want to make sure you haven't captured your working yarn or your current loop for your previous color. And we're going to skip our slip stitch, chain 2, and then place a slip stitch in the top of our first double crochet. And we're going to chain 1, and from here we're going to be working back post stitches. So basically, instead of working in the top of the stitch, you're going to be working around the stem or the post that forms your double crochets. So what we're going to do is yarn over and then insert our crochet hook from behind our project. We're going to work between our chain 2 and our first double crochet. Then we want to insert our crochet hook between our first and second double crochet like this. And it helps if you turn this kind of around so you can see what you're doing. From here, we're going to yarn over and pull through our post, and then yarn over and drop 2 loops at a time to complete our stitch. So now we're just going to place 1 back post stitch in each stitch in our row. And when you make it around to the end of your row, make sure you don't accidentally work in your chain 2, otherwise you will be increasing in this row. So from here, we want to place a slip stitch in the top of our first back post stitch. And we're going to trade out our crochet hook and our stitch marker. And now you should be in your previous color. So we're going to chain 3. Again, make sure this working yarn is to the side, and we are going to slide our crochet hook back in our current stitch where we just placed a slip stitch. We're going to place a slip stitch and then a chain 2 and a double crochet. From here, we're just going to place 1 double crochet in each stitch in our row for a total of 80 double crochets. And at the end of your row, you're going to place a slip stitch in the top of your first double crochet. So make sure you skip your slip stitch and your chain 2. And from here, we are going to chain 2 and place a double crochet back in our current stitch. And then we're going to place 1 double crochet in each stitch in our row for a total of 80 double crochets. And again, at the end of your row, you're going to skip your slip stitch and your chain 2 and then place a slip stitch in the top of your first double crochet. And from here, we are going to repeat this section of 4 rows 3 more times. And after you're done repeating your rows, then your beanie should look something like this. And just like before, we're going to preserve our last little loop here, and we're going to chain 4 with our white color yarn. And just like before, we want to place a slip stitch back in our current stitch and then chain 2. And from here, we're going to place 1 double crochet in our first 40 stitches of this row. And just like all the other rows, our first double crochet should go back in our current stitch. And once you have your 40 double crochets in place, I want you to take your working yarn from your previous color, and we're going to tuck it sort of back behind these double crochets. From here, we're going to skip our chain 2, and then we're going to place a slip stitch in the top of our first double crochet. So you can see here that we've divided our elf beanie in half. From here, we're just going to chain 1 and place 1 back post stitch in each stitch in our row, just like we were doing before. And make sure you aren't accidentally working around your chain 2. And at the end of this row, you should have a total of 40 back post stitches. And when you get to the end of your row, you're going to skip your chain 1 and then place a slip stitch in the top of your first back post stitch, just like before. From here, we're going to trade out our crochet hook and our stitch marker, and just make sure you pull your loop to the inside of your new little hole here. And make sure you move your working yarn to the side, and we're going to chain 3, just like we were doing before. We're going to place a slip stitch back in that current stitch. Again, all of this is just like before. And we're going to chain 2. We're going to dive right back into our first stitch with a double crochet. And from here, we are going to randomly double crochet 2 stitches together twice in our row. And if you make these decreasing stitches random, the overall look of this portion will be a lot more rounded and less triangular. So it really makes it look a little bit better if you can just embrace the chaos. So when it comes to double crocheting 2 stitches together, you're going to yarn over and insert your crochet hook in your first stitch. Then you're going to yarn over and pull up through your stitch, and yarn over and drop 2 loops. So you should have 2 loops on your crochet hook, and you're going to yarn over again and slide your crochet hook in your next stitch. Then you're going to yarn over and pull up through your stitch, and yarn over and drop 2 loops, and then yarn over and drop 3 loops. So that's how we're going to double crochet 2 stitches together in our row. Otherwise, every other stitch in your row is going to get 1 double crochet, just like we were doing before. And at the end of our row, we should have a total of 38 double crochets. And at the end of your row, you want to skip your slip stitch and your chain 2, and then place a slip stitch in the top of your first double crochet. And from here, we're going to chain 2 and repeat our last row. So we're going to place 1 double crochet in each stitch in our row, except for 2 different places where we want to double crochet 2 stitches together. And at the end of our row, we should have a total of 36 double crochets. And when you get to the end of your row, skip your slip stitch and your chain 2, and then we're going to slip stitch into our first double crochet. So from here, we're going to go back to our white colored yarn, and we are not going to place any decreasing stitches for those 2 rows. So from here, we're only going to be decreasing in our 2 rows of double crochets with our green colored yarn. But we're basically going to follow these 4 rows for our next 14 rows. And this should get you down to 8 stitches in your latest row, and you should be working your second row of your green color. And when the time comes that you start to run out of some of your yarn, set the excess yarn to the side and grab your next strand of yarn that you're going to be working with. And from here, just hold on to both of those yarn ends and place your next stitch like normal while holding on to those ends. And I like to tie my 2 tails together twice and then crochet over them in my next row. From here, you're just going to continue working with your new strand of yarn. And once you've reached 8 stitches in your latest row, your elf hat should look something like this. From here, we want to cut and tie off both of our strands of yarn. So we're going to start with our little white strand down here. And when it comes to your green strand of yarn, I want you to leave a longer tail of about 8 inches. And we're going to tie this off, and then I want you to weave your tail in and out of your last row of double crochets. And once you're done weaving your tail, then I want you to pull on it so that you can tighten the cinch in the top. From here, I'm going to tie this tail off with one of the available loops in our last row of double crochets. And then I'm going to leave this tail out so that I can easily attach a pom-pom to it. So go ahead and flip your hat over so that you're on the side with this seam here. And we're going to attach our white color to our crochet hook using a slip knot. Then we want to begin right here in the stitch directly before where we left off with our other little circle here. And we're going to slide our crochet hook in that stitch and place a single crochet, then a chain stitch. Then we want to go back to that same stitch and place a double crochet. From here, we want to join with the other side of our hat where we haven't already worked. So in the stitch next to where we left off with our small circle. And we're just going to place a double crochet there. And you do have the option of crocheting over your tail in this row if you would like to. From here, we're going to place 1 double crochet in each of these stitches in our smaller circle here. So you should have a total of 40 double crochets when you're done. And at the end of your row, you're going to skip your single crochet chain stitch and then place a slip stitch in the top of your first double crochet. And just like before, we're going to chain 1 and place a row of back post stitches. And make sure you don't accidentally work around your chain 2 there. And at the end of the row, you're going to skip your slip stitch in your chain 1 and place a slip stitch in the top of your first back post stitch. Then you want to preserve your loop just like you did before. And you're going to attach the next color of yarn to your crochet hook using a slip knot. And we're going to slide our crochet hook right back into the same stitch where we've already placed a slip stitch. And we're going to place a single crochet chain stitch and then a double crochet back in that same stitch. And from here, we're just going to repeat these steps to recreate this other side of our elf hat. So just make sure at the end of this row that you skip your single crochet chain stitch. And from here, the pattern should be exactly the same. And you're going to finish off your second side the same way you did your first side. And I attached 2 crochet pom-poms. What I like about these is that they're medium in size, and I'm going to be releasing the video for these pom-poms on Wednesday, so keep a lookout for that. And let me know in the comments below if you ended up making this. I always love to hear about your crochet adventures. And if this video helped you, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel, Crochet with Julie, for more crochet patterns and tutorials. Thank you so much for working with me, and I hope you have a wonderful, awesome day.